So yeah, I'm by the computer doing this one today. If you have any suggestions, go ahead and add them in the comments. Email me if you want to. And I'm just slowly working up this channel to hopefully get it to really go places. I'm going to be sharing parts of other videos and there's about 3 or 4 videos I want to make addressing topics about going to cemeteries before I actually take you guys with me. So those will also be in the works. It's a lot of fun to have time for this channel, really. The Portrait of Dorian Gray. Could be mistaken, but I believe this is the only full-length novel that an Irishman called Oscar Wilde wrote. He ended up getting arrested for homosexuality, which was illegal back in the day. But Dorian Gray, I mean, maybe a lot of you, if you haven't seen the show Penny Dreadful, go check that out, because that's really good Victorian spooky, you know, that kind of stuff. But Dorian Gray, he basically is just this kind of spoiled dude who, his portrait makes him immortal, okay? And so he basically gets to experience generations of excess, people living and dying, all his lovers. He does, you know, he likes men and women. You know, he's like a bisexual character. So he basically grows cold and all that kind of stuff. He just has a lot of tragedies, really, loss. There's this older gentleman who's like a kind of sugar daddy father figure who's always like, psst, you know, let's go do this naughty, you know, thing. And you know, it's like you want to feel sorry for Dorian Gray, but he's just so in love with himself in his portrait. But you know, eventually he ends up stabbing his own portrait, and you know, he's finally able to die, because when his like servants come back, they find him also dead of stab wounds. And that's, you know, that's kind of how that goes down. But I mean, it's kind of, I think that, you know, when one looks at the left-hand path, that there is, it is kind of a question of, you know, mortality. Like, you know, I think one way to explore such an issue is to think, well, what if one lived forever? Would there be would I perceive there would be a problem with that? And so, you know, like these kinds of stories, they really explore that for us, and I love it. Stalking the Wild Pendulum. I'm going to butcher this guy's name, but I'm going to call him Ben Bentov. He wrote maybe like 3 other works. Tried to invent something called Diet Spaghetti. I don't even really understand that, but he really writes about basically quantum mechanics, consciousness. I do love those kinds of topics. He was he was the only immediate member of his family to survive the Holocaust, and yet he went on to really go into consciousness and extensively. He was actually on his way to talk with, I believe, a group of Japanese Buddhist kinds of people, and his plane, and I think almost 300 people died when his plane took off from Chicago O'Hare, and they lost, I think, hydraulic fluid in half of the plane. So there's like a really famous photo where it's dipping down, because it can't gain that lagging half of the plane. And so there were absolutely no survivors, including him. But I mean, seriously, he does an interview with this kind of hippie guy who asks him about stuff, but he basically is the one who talks about how the purpose, what is the purpose of us, and that is that we are God the divine, and we are its sensory experience. So that's why we see more and more colors as time passes, humans. The visual spectrum is evolving, so it's going to continue to do that. Different animals do that at different rates depending on, what's going to suit the animal the best. Thinking, deliberate nature. So, yeah. He also talks about the idea that through either techniques like meditation and sensory deprivation, fasting, one can experience other types of consciousness through opening of the senses. EMF, electromagnetic fields. When they are, everything makes sound vibration, right? Once it approaches the human audio or visual spectrum, the human brain will perceive it. So basically, the dog, let's say that there's a ghost, because that's the your dog is going to hear it, is going to perceive that sound vibration as sound and energy change. A human, if the thing is approaching the visible spectrum, will see shadows move out of the corner of one's eye, or movement out of the periphery. That is because it's still moving so fast, because it's on this higher plane just above like the visible spectrum where you could see details of it, but you're experiencing it as a shadow. Someone who has senses that are a little bit more open, and this can happen for various reasons, and I do think that even maybe like people in my case, you could just be born this way, can perceive more than just the shadow. Maybe for myself, it's often comes in the form of visuals and thoughts, to really detail what I'm looking at. So, that's an idea, and he really kind of gets your mind going. I have to share them with you guys. I do every time I know, or I should say every year list, and that's okay. So that would be, it's an interesting idea. The ancient Greeks, they thought that the five senses, it was just such an important part of the human experience and living and dying. And Faust by Goethe, so kind of a Dorian Gray type-esque story, where Faust is he's so accomplished in his life that he basically stands there and says, I want to experience, I need, more, like, ultimate knowledge. I need knowledge that is beyond this earth. And, he does some stuff he thinks about, actually. He thinks he's gonna, kill himself, so he can go to, higher frequency realms and experience more knowledge that living people can't have, right? But he ends up, summoning Mephistopheles, and the rest is a beautiful, spooky history. When Faust asks Mephistopheles what Mephistopheles gets out of having a pact with a human, he says just to be around humans, the emotions, just especially intense emotions. And to me, that's kind of, as a practitioner, definitely spirits are really attracted to the human emotion. And so It's not like, I guess what I'm saying is, it's not like Mephistopheles wants a soul to, he wants to have Faust do everything that he wants. In fact, he tells Faust, hey, I just came along for the ride. I'm asking you questions because you're human. I'm trying to learn from you. You're making the decision, so I'm just along for the ride to experience your emotions. And I think that, there's actual truth in that. Much like Dorian Gray, Faust actually experiences excess pleasure, thinking with that thought that it's going to make him happy and complete, satisfied. But that is not, of course, what it means to be a human being. So they do not find that. Instead, they have to search for, humanity, for themselves as this final sort of answer. Because in the end, that is really, death is a very personal experience, and so is the search for oneself. So we can talk with other people, we can be around other people, but we all will die alone, even, say right next to people. It's still this, it's just you and death. And so I think that a lot of these, different works are these authors, artists' attempts to look at this before they have, since gone and passed into that next realm. So, okay, Dante's Inferno. So, Dante is like in the, I think, 1400s. He was basically exiled at the time that he wrote this, and he really brings in a lot of ideas of the different sins. But it really is interesting because a lot of it matches up with the ideas of Buddhism, where, let's say people, one example I remember is that people are just like basically sex addicts, and so they're in this different realm after death as a bunch of worms, slithering, slimy, not pleasurable, right? And so they're that's like their hell, right? That their own passions. So this is very similar, except of course has like the Christian twist. There's even parts of it where Virgil is the guide of Dante, in this whole story. And Virgil actually wrote the Aeneid. There's definitely a section where he talks about all the pagans of ancient times are just going to hell because they don't know Jesus. So it's, of course, it's very Christian. But the classical ideas of it, like I mentioned, that really draw into the idea of like obsession and how it is like a madness, like a possession. These ideas of sins that really, kind of can translate into being possessed by an idea of something. The Tibetan Book of the Dead talks about the different bardos. This one was written in the 1300s by a monk, and it is kind of like literally a handbook. Like if you had just died, kind of like Beetlejuice, the 80s movie, you had just died. So now you get a book about how to be dead. Number one, you don't have a body anymore. So you are all that you think and a culmination of your thoughts. And so that is what you're going to literally see, experience, because that is all that's left of you is the and dream, thoughts. Thoughts are much more fast and real, obviously, without a body. So it just really goes into that. And bardos basically just mean transitions. So the transition of life and death. And then there's also the transition of different stages of life, through altered states of consciousness. So it really is a very in-depth look, like explanation if you were going to explain being dead to dead people. So it is interesting to me personally because there are a lot of ghosts that understand that they're dead, but they're are confused about being dead, and I think that a lot of that has to do with in sort of the Western idea that we are just body, that this is who I am. And so when there is nothing left except the ego that is basically just weightless air. Wicca, A Guide for the Solitary Practitioner by Scott Cunningham. So I really do recommend a lot of white magic topics, right hand path, if you'd like to call it that, things about being whole, healing. Those are things that you need to know how to do anyway before you go and the fork in the road, which is actually popularized by Virgil. Comes to this fork in the road and you have to make a choice. Go down the right hand path first, then you can kind of come circle back, because you definitely have to know healing, those kinds of cleansing of energy. You're going to be doing rituals and stuff. You definitely have to have at least some basics down on that. So Wicca, that's a good place, and it talks about incense, healing crystals, but it just the foundations really of, I think, exploring a path of witchcraft, a nature kind of mindset, paganism in any way. There's definitely room for the basics, like I mentioned, and that's where you really want to start anyway. Definitely, you don't want to be like, well, I just read a book on magic, and now I'm going to go to the cemetery and summon a demon or something, and you don't know anything about the demon. You don't know anything about your own, whatever protective measures. So that's probably not the best idea then. The Tomb by H.P. Lovecraft. I love all the mythos that he created. He was actually really interested in the occult as well. But The Tomb is one of my favorites because it's like this guy who's drawn to his ancestrals. I believe it's a mausoleum. Yeah, mausoleum. And so he goes and spends a bunch of time out there, and then he starts sleeping out there. And it's basically like how he eventually starts hallucinating or experiencing through dreams what his ancestors were like, and then eventually I hope the lighting goes a little bit better today, you guys. Then you can actually see that I am a redhead. So sometimes it seems like my hair is darker than others. I mean, in whatever kind of redness. I've been hiking a little bit, so kind of gives that, I think, strawberry sort of blonde hair tint to me, but just random shit I'm saying here while I kind of look at what we'll go over next. Okay, Staying Sober Without God by Jeffrey Munn. So, for anybody out there who trying to get sober, been sober, just want to, have that support, you guys kind of know 12 steps is, that's still very monotheistic and pushed. I never ended up going. I just needed to have that. I needed to just be with my own energy. But, you know, if I've talked to so many people who've done it, and that's like their biggest thing if they are recovering pagan, occultists in any way. So, you know, it's just a good, I actually read it and it's really good, and, you know, it talks about, like, with each of the 12 steps, how you could, you know, either do it without the idea of God or approach it in, like, a different mindset. So, you know, just wanted to put that out there. So, yeah. Carlos Castaneda. So he was, like, the big hippie guru of the 1990s. So eventually he disappeared with like three other women who were anthropologists as well, because he was, and none of them have ever been found. Maybe, actually, no, I take that back. I think one or two of the ladies has been found, and then one or two have never been recovered. He himself has never been recovered, Carlos. But so essentially he's he's an anthropologist, and he goes down to South America. So the two of his best works, one is called A Separate Reality, and the idea is like we need plants to see into other dimensions. So peyote and mushrooms are, you know, these chemical plants that allow the mind to see via the neurotransmitters different dimensions. And the teachings of Don Juan. So that's kind of, yeah, I've read all the rest of his stuff, and a lot of it is the same ideas, kind of regurgitated, but definitely still, I think it's worth a read. So, you know, Don Juan's about becoming different animal consciousnesses. So, you know, the spirit of the bear and how primal man, it's like, well, why did primal man just draw, you know, other animals and, you know, sex acts or the, you know, voluptuous woman. These are all things that I believe are the earth was sending, these signals, and people's minds interpret it as being one with these other animals and their importance, back when humans were still receptive. But yeah, so that just was like, you know, it kind of popularized anthropology like that, the idea like, that, you know, you gotta go down, you gotta go to some fucking different culture, just fucking drop, you know, have a trip, and there's, you know, you'll never see your life the same again, which I'm sure is true. I mean, if you have a psychedelic or paranormal experience, it is going to change your life forever. Perspective. Yeah, I mean, yes, you can easily get back to normal life, but as, you know, as far as like when you just are alone with your thoughts, you know, it's a little bit changed. Anton Lavey, he wrote about 5 books in total. So Anton Lavey is the founder of Satanic Church from the 60s. Sammy Davis Jr. and the fuck was her name? Oh, she was that 60s bombshell blonde icon, not Marilyn Monroe. Jane Mansfield. They were some people who were interested in Satanism. So, you know, they got tax exempt status, and, you know, scared all the normals. This was way before the Satanic Panic. So there's just kind of like, here's these very naughty hippies. So the Satanic Witch is kind of about, it's basically a book about, like, if you're a woman, you know, if you talk softly and kind of look down and just whatever, if you dress a certain way, these different body postures even, then you're going to attract a man. So if you attract somebody's attention, then you can start to have this control. So it's just, I mean, it's amusing to me. So, but I mean, really, it's not that, like, satanic. I mean, fucking, you know, people are just attracted to each other, and that's kind of how it goes. But I just thought, you know, hey, if you want funny, it's kind of humorous, really. But yeah, so, you know, how to use your feminine charms to attract whoever you want and whatever you want. The Satanic Bible. So it's kind of a mix of secular stuff, but at the same time, it really does embrace occult ideas. It's basically, you know, in the Satanic Bible, it's talking about, like, hey, these rituals are great ways to, like, open your mind, but it's not like saying that, you know, like that Satanists believe in the paranormal or anything. There's a lot of Satanists that are atheists, and they identify with Satanism, which is really cool. But yeah, so, I mean, because in the Satanic Bible, you know, he lists the Enochian keys, but at the same time, he's promoting secular ideas. And then, you know, he just goes over the 9 satanic statements. One of the things he talks about is, instead of praying, take action. Now, to me, praying is, I mean, in itself, very powerful. Such, you know, as long as it's a contrary thought, just saying prayers for you, motherfucker, online, right? And then you just, there's not like an act behind it. That's why that's so cheap. So, take action. So that's kind of like the idea of doing rituals with our gods and demons and angels, is that there's a focus, there's a goal here, and I'm going to take this action. Maybe I fasted, maybe I'm offering a libation, but I am taking the action that, you know, even if it is symbolic or ritualistic towards making that goal happen. So I just think it is kind of, it's more like just, instead of just praying, you know, pray deep, pray with an action. And I think that's honestly a great take and great reminder. Edgar Allan Poe, I love the classics. I mean, The Raven is a great poem, and I think in one of his poems is like The House of Spirits, and it's actually kind of like a part of the fall of the House of Usher, but it describes the actual house as like having like the windows are like its eyes, and different features of the house are you know human-like. So it you know, I actually like that because it really adds to the idea that, you know, because it's like these generations of people till there's none left. And the whole, I mean, literal, you know, ominous, you know, energy of the home. Like the idea that homes do have energy, which they do. Of course, it depends, like I said. The Mask of the Red Death, and it is kind of, you know, those ideas that death comes in these unexpected forms, but we all see death in different psychological ways. And so, you know, the things that we think of as bad luck, or are they them, you know, is that making that, you know, situation more, you know, come true? It's just, you know, stuff to think about. I like the Murder in the Rue Morgue. You know, it wasn't even an actual, you know, human who does this crime. And so it really is one of the first stories where it's like a detective style idea. So, you know, whatever, decades before Agatha Christie comes around, and it kind of, you know, sets that up to be a standard, really. Edgar Allan Poe is talking about, like, there's 2 detectives, and the one kind of tells him the facts or explains things in the way he perceives, and then he, the main, you know, the Sherlock kind of guy, describes, you know, the obvious, you know, ending to the mystery to everybody in such a neat way. So this come from Edgar Allan Poe. I was just talking about this with my friend the other day. that I just made a video for her. W. Jacobs, who he wrote The Monkey's Paw. He kind of actually, I mean, that's his most famous one. He wrote a lot of other works about being at sea in the Navy. But one of the features is that it's ordinary-ass people and strange and paranormal stuff happens to them, which Stephen King really, I mean, he really made that his, motif right there. That, like you're in Maine, normal-ass Maine. Everybody's got a job, everybody's got a normal life, but then some weird fucked up shit happens. So he was one of the first people to talk about that, ordinary people having paranormal experiences. Infancy, Gospel of Thomas. So this is this is actually parts of the Bible that were omitted like 300 or 400 years later by early Christians. Probably because they didn't want people to think this shit about Jesus, but it is where Jesus is a kid, and another kid runs by him and bumps into him, and then Jesus says, you will lay down and never get up again, and so the kid dies. There's also he does all this other stuff, but he actually raises a kid from the dead to prove that he is innocent of killing. So he's really fucked up, right? And then Jesus is just a bitch. He goes to school and he tries to tell the people, he says, I'm not going to learn from you. You will be quiet and listen to me, for I know everything. He's just fucked up. He's just a really bratty kid. Killing people, inflicting people with blindness. Yeah, so it's called the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. And Jesus kills some kids. As a kid, and Jesus himself is a kid. You can, when you read it, he just is like, you shut your mouth, for I am the truth, and I mean, this is one of those works that makes me really, stand in my Luciferian truth, which is that I do not want God, the Christian God, and the Jesus stuff to be what I think of when I, think of gods and spirit relationships. Sounds like a psycho, really. Just a thought. So, of course, all this is Carl Jung. Probably the best works are going to be the Red Book, which is 7 Sermons to the Dead. So Jung was basically an occultist as well, and he goes through a period of time where he plays with his imagination and his alter ego, and he writes about it very extensively. There's definitely parts of it that are like, he's talking to the dead, performing rituals, being possessed, and that is the Red Book. Really great. And then the other kind of one that I would recommend would be Man and His Symbols. I believe it's the last thing he ever wrote, maybe besides a manuscript before his death. And it's about how archetypes are a part of our dreams, and symbols are basically these, needs of us manifesting. So, okay. Potential health benefits of garlic based on human intervention studies, a brief overview. So there's just an internet link, and I'll put that below. What's the deal with raw garlic? Why is it good? So it's got a range of vitamins and minerals. And it's also a form of prebiotic, and sulfur, your body converts it into gases that will actually help you breathe. And when your breathing is at a more normal, optimal rate, the rest of you can function better. So, you know, if you're interested in that. Same kind of idea would be daffodil greens. There's just a range of vitamins, minerals, prebiotics that are in that that are just gifts from the earth that we should be eating. Everything that you need, that we need, that comes from this food source that's living, is just absolutely great for your body, and it's soluble, so it means your body can easily take it. Things like garlic, you know, and the fiber parts of it help stabilize blood sugar. Prebiotics trigger the release of insulin, which is a hormone. And so when you consume prebiotic fibers and they're able to live longer in your stomach and eat those fibers, they send signals to release insulin. Because the problem isn't your body releasing insulin, it's when you consume just so much sugar, have an absolutely terrible diet, and it's just the big idea is no fiber. These prebiotics die off, and so they don't send signals out to release insulin. Now you just have now you just have sugar circulating in your blood, damaging every single part of you. That's how we go blind. It heightens your blood pressure. So it's very important to have prebiotics, because they are think of it like serotonin and LSD. That's what prebiotics are to these insulin triggers. Okay, so, you know, and Mother Nature is there offering all we need. We just have to look in the right places. Let me see here. Okay, illnesses in technologically advanced societies due to lack of grounding. So Clint Ober, who's wrote many books as well, and they're all great, he's kind of the father of this movement as far as he paid for the studies. I mean, he's a hippie. He paid for the studies, though, that for real science behind this. And so a sort of a brief kind of overview of that would just be that we modern people can go to the doctor when we have these infections that people before rubber shoes, and you know, they really couldn't go get this kind of stuff. But us as modern people, we're having the biggest problem with modern life is electron deficiency. So because we're not grounded to the earth, we're not getting electrons, and that is, you know, making us not function optimally here. One of the ideas behind this is that when you get an injury, when you feel sore, your body sends out white blood cells. But before it even does that, it creates hydrogen peroxide that to the specific site. So let's say I hurt my hand. So hydrogen peroxide is created, white blood cells are sent to the site, and the white blood cells will take the electrons out of surrounding healthy tissues. So you get inflammation. So let's say you got a cut, now it's inflamed. So it gets even more inflamed because the body is trying to send out antioxidants that are just getting trapped at the site because it can't flow into this inflamed area. So it's creating more and more inflammation into the site, and it's not stopping like it's supposed to. If you're standing on the ground, and that's one of the biggest, you know, things about grounding that that it's promoted for, is literal healing of like your fucking flesh wounds. So same idea. I've got a cut on my hand. You go stand outside and ground yourself for a while each day. The inflammation goes away, right? So the white blood cells were necessary for that first injury, right? But when you're standing on the earth and getting electrons, those electrons can go back into this area, because when you're grounded, it affects your whole body immediately. You get electrons, the inflammation goes away. So instead of having that puffiness around the injury, it just relaxes the inflammation, because white blood cells are not continuously sent to the site of injury, and antioxidants that the body does produce can just go right into that little injury area, and you're not having inflammation, you're not having pain, soreness, anything. So we're all on our carpet in our rubber shoes, and we are not grounded to the earth. This is very vital for normal functioning. Humans are electrical and chemical in nature, but electrical first. So if I could give one thing to the world, you guys, I want people to get leather shoes. Like, make leather shoes and pass them out to people who live on, Native Americans who live on the reservation, people who are homeless in rural areas. Because people who are in the city, they're standing on the sidewalk and there's nowhere for them to go ground themselves. But that we would give people such a chance if they could just, have protection on their feet, but still be able to get electrons as they go along. Then things like, food that they can get from food banks and, along the way, that's going to help them too. But this would literally help some of these people's severe issues if we just grounded them right away, okay? Like, that's one of my dreams and stuff with this channel, is to just be able to reach a lot of people this way, inspire. So I definitely would have to get people behind me on that kind of ambitious goal. The Iliad and the Odyssey were written by Homer, and classics. He journeys through the underworld. This is really a man's search for themselves. It does remind me of the Four of Swords. Kind of will tie that into that card as well. But it's a man's literal search for himself. So this guy who's in the military, and he has to figure out who he is. Definitely, necromancy. I mean, as long as humans have been writing stuff, necromancy is like one of the first topics ever written about by man. So, in case if you were ever wondering if your interest is just, without merit, it's actually a very instinctual thing for human beings. But he, ends up in a bunch of different places, having all these different experiences and realizing this isn't what I want. So it's not, he doesn't know exactly who he is, but he learns what he doesn't, what he's not. And he, eventually comes back to this place after being away at battle. And, he's literally just finding himself. And to me, that is like a guy who, in the Four of Swords, who does take on this responsibility of, bearing the burden of the work, being the workhorse, and how that for a healthy psyche to function in that way, there has to be time to step aside and be alone, to think about, that have a man having time to himself, like let's say a man cave, or time with his friends, because that's going to be necessary. A man can't just live for just his wife and kid, or family. A man must also live for himself, and that will give him that energy to care for others. We see that. So that's kind of the big things out of that. Okay, guys, so I don't exactly know how many. I think we're around 25. Maybe it might have been like 22, something like that. But I'm going to call it good for this one. I'm going to make 3 more parts. I will try to do some timestamps here, so check that out if that is helpful. But it's just kind of a sampling of some of the stuff I like to read. I read a lot. My brain is kind of like common sense. You know, I get like to explain myself in real life. That's not obvious to me somehow, but I can actually read like, I don't know, maybe a few novels a day and remember, you know, the gist of stuff. But I mean, it depends on how, you know, whatever I integrate that information, but you know, that's a little bit odd, I guess. So, you know, it's kind of hard for me to like, I guess what I'm saying is I have so many thoughts and my mind is racing. It would have to be to kind of have that ability. So, you know, yeah, I think that breaking it into parts just makes more sense than just doing certain themes. But I'll show you guys a few hardcover copies for the next session. And then we'll get into more people like, you know, Nietzsche. We'll go into Freud, the Goetia, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Talk about some of the authors at Bolg. And then I'm going to review a couple of works that other people have sent me as well. I'll go into, of course, the Lingpa. So yeah, you know, all that kind of stuff that's coming up, so you know, stay tuned for sure. Anyway, this part 1 of 4 of my book list, and then, you know, or, no, there's about 2 of them that are medical journals that I will link in the comments for you. Please comment, suggest books, tell me your thoughts. Bye.